Agenda for this afternoon's study session, we're going to start with the police headquarters building presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate the opportunity to come back and update you on the project. We'll introduce the members of the team as they come up, so it'll be a few minutes. We felt it was important to get this information to you before the public hearing, so you're able to answer questions as they come up before the 24th. This has been an incredible journey, to say the least, I think, and we're excited about the progress that we've made. We've listened carefully, worked diligently to make the best investment for the citizens of Council Bluffs from the time the doors open and hopefully for generations to come. Some 8 months ago, our internal planning team met with our design team, Hayfor and our owner's rep, Project Advocates. And as a project team, we defined, let's see if this works the right way. We defined the charter for the project. And that consisted of project objectives, project goals, and team goals. And they're listed in your handout. It's important to note some of those goals, though. Make sure I don't skip over them. Mike, you should have a copy of it in front of you. The objectives were to provide professional services to our citizens, a modern, functional, and safe work conditions, plan for long-term growth, and a vision for future needs, to be responsive to the changes in crimes and duties, and to be fiscally responsible with the taxpayers' investment and to stretch those dollars as far as we can. Program goals include providing an adequate sized modern law enforcement facility with the appropriate public image desired, distinct and welcoming public entry, a separate and secure parking or public and operations access and security and parking, a sally port for security of people and property, records efficiency, appropriate employee locker, changing areas, exercise and training spaces, durable, quality, energy efficient, and low maintenance materials, able to accommodate new technology and changes in mission and methods, and built to accommodate a minimum of 20 years of growth. You'll also see at the top of that, there's been a lot of talk that the building is programmed out to 58,000 square feet. Through value-based engineering, we've reduced that down to 52.5, and then the outbuilding is 3,270 feet for a total of 55,807. The team goals include transparent, documented, and efficient communications, the scope, definition, schedule, and budget control, predictable budgets and FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, security systems, communications, to meet the schedule and budget targets, and we have. To incorporate best practices from other facilities and uses and input from the users, and to make sure that we incorporate grant funding when available. Full use, best value of the $20 million bond investment. Lastly, the team building and social activities to enhance the goals and outcomes of the project, which we haven't been able to do yet. On the next slide, I'll introduce our team members that are here. From the department was myself, Captain Lee Master over services, Captain Milner over administration, Captain Wedham in investigations, and Captain Schultz in uniform. From the city of Omaha, Chief of Staff Wendy Schultz, Kim Reeby from purchasing, Mark Howard, the CIO, and Rick Reichenberg from facility maintenance. Hayfor is represented today by Ken Hinton. He's a managing partner and the project manager for this. He's been overseeing everything since the beginning, including our needs assessment. Chris Berkmeyer is not here today, and Kurt Krambeck is not here today, but they've been integral in keeping this going, as well as Peggy. Project Advocates is represented today by Ray Radway. He's a principal in the organization, and John Taylor is the managing principal. Rad's not here. Adam Raymakers has been pre-construction and estimates, and Ray Whitmore is taking care of the IT work. We also wanted to make sure we mentioned some of the other partners that have been involved in the process. Union Pacific Railroad, because of the grant they provided us. The Pottawatomie County Attorney's Office, because of the cost sharing and partnership in purchasing some equipment for this new building. Black Hills Energy and Mid-America Energy as well. In fact, today Mid-America Energy is represented by Trudy Johansson. She's a project manager for economic development for Mid-America and has provided us with a brief 88-page. We'll go report on the efficiencies of the system. We'll go through page by page in a second. Okay. You have a summary in your packet. And Paula Hazelwood is also here from Advanced Southwest Iowa Corp. As a partner in this project. This phase of the project has been broken down into several critical segments and milestones. Each included budget and design elements. We began talking big picture, building footprint, room layouts, site plan, budget, and then came the HVAC, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, wall coverings, paint, floor coverings, windows, and doors. At each face-to-face meeting every 2 weeks, we dug deeper and deeper into the details. I have to be honest, when I began my career some 34 years ago, I never imagined or dreamed that we would drill down to talk about fixture types, where outlets go, where data ports go, how commissioning processes add value to a project, or understand how the sun and where it sits at a particular time of the year during a particular time of the day would affect the efficiencies of the building. But I've learned all those things and so much more from this team. It's been a great opportunity. Each discussion focused on creating the best design and function for our staff in an effort to provide the best service for our citizens for years to come, all while staying in the budget. The next slide real quickly. I'll touch on, I mentioned some partners earlier. They're up on the screen now. Union Pacific has provided us a $25,000 grant for the building. The Potawatomi County Attorney's Office has helped us with a $90,000 purchase, contributing $70,000 of that for the startup costs. We have 2 outstanding grant applications that we haven't heard back on yet, and we're working to find funding for the exercise room. The energy efficiencies real quickly without going into the 88-page report. There's up to $100,000 in rebates coming once the building is up and running, and we will save between $27,000 and $35,000 a year because of the efficiencies that are built into the systems. None of this would have been possible without the support of you as the council, Mayor Walsh, Chief of Staff Schultz, and all our other team partners. Several times throughout the project, I wanted to provide an update. The challenge was that after every meeting, we were all excited about what we just learned, but it was outdated. And I didn't feel good about bringing you something that was already old and not providing information. So rather than a half-baked update, I chose to wait until now. I hope you can understand that. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Radway now to talk about Project Advocate's role and the other aspects of the project.
Good, thanks, Chief. Good afternoon, I'm Radway, Principal with Project Advocates. We've been the owner's representative through this process and have really enjoyed this process where we've gotten to date, and the journey that we've all been through together has been great. And I have to tell you, I work on a lot of different projects around the Midwest, and it is a very highly functioning team that Chief Carmody's put together with the design team, with the consultants, make decisions on schedule, great direction. So how do I move things along here? I probably hit the wrong button. There we go. So just to talk a bit about the budget process in just a couple minutes here. So we've been tracking the costs, the budgets of this project really since we got involved, Project Advocates, last September. And that went through several phases of the program, the initial program for the project. We went through a schematic design phase, a design development phase, 50% construction documents, and then really where we're at today is 95% construction documents that went in for the permitting process really last Friday. So that is just underway, heading towards final construction documents, and then the general contractor bidding process I'll talk about a bit as we look at the schedule side. So every step of the way we're tracking costs of the project, what are potential value opportunities that we could save dollars on, get better quality, better materials, how that has gone every step of the way, and has gone extremely well. We're also planning, you can see below there, some other procurement opportunities, not just the contractor bids, but there's almost $500,000 of items that we are planning to buy direct so we can control the procurement process of that and the competitive bid process versus just going through the general contractors for that bid process. And you can see the list of items there that we're currently planning to really do a separate procurement process, be able to save dollars, be able to control the process, and really get the best value that we can as we move ahead. Off to the right, something that you can't see at all, that's just a summary of the latest budget costs from those 50% construction documents of where we stand, and I'll blow up a few of these items. There's a 20-page detailed estimate that backs that up. with all the quantities, the items, everything that goes into all the different parts and pieces, site through final mechanical systems for the project. So lots of detail. This just gives us a summary and how do we best utilize that $20 million bond issue. So just to pull from that summary side, as Chief Carmody said, 55,800 square foot between the two buildings, the main headquarters and the vehicle building. The site is coming in just under 2.4 million current budgets for the project. The buildings themselves being plural, but really mainly the headquarters building, 10.4 million is our current budget for that particular piece of the project. And then the general contractor, and we'll talk about that selection process coming up shortly, we see about 1.8 million in that general contractor costs in their bids and their general conditions, insurance and bonds, their overhead and profit, all of that piece. So we have a contractor bid target of right at about 14.6 million, and we'll talk about that process here coming up. And those separate bid packages I mentioned just a little bit ago, just short of 500,000 that we see those being worth. So just over 15.1 million in what we would call construction hard costs of the project. Moving on, what we'd say are the soft costs of the project and other professional services that include Hafer-Wysocki Architects and their consultants, JEO, the whole group, SES Engineering, their consultant group, project advocates fees for the project, and also that includes like a lot of the initial surveying, soil testing reports, a lot of that kind of initial work to be able to set up the project. As Chief Carmody mentioned, fixtures, furniture, and equipment, the various systems that are in the project, and then various equipment, specialty equipment that is going in, storage systems, lockers, those kind of things are just about 1.2 million. The real estate cost, the purchase of the land for the project was 881,000 back quite a while ago. And then currently we're carrying a contingency of $600,000 in the budget, right at about 3% of the total project costs as a contingency as we go into this contractor bidding process, make sure we can get all the parts and pieces that everybody wants. So just short of 4.9 million in the soft costs. You bring the two together between hard costs and soft costs, and right on that total project budget of 20 million. So that's the budget piece. To talk a little bit about the schedule that we've been through, or I guess the last piece of the budget side is the value analysis process that we've been through in each one of these steps. And again, just showing a report to the side of how we track all these different options and alternates going through the project. We've saved about $600,000 to date in value analysis options and really getting the best materials, the best products, durability, longevity through that value analysis process that's taken place. If the bids are favorable, if we are able to take bids late in May and we've got favorable bid climate in the general contractor community, we have set up a number of enhancements that we could actually improve the project through some alternates and bid enhancements, and you can kind of see that list that's there that we're hopeful we'll be able to incorporate those into the project, but they're not necessary initially at this time. We also did an extensive inventory of the current systems, equipment that the police department has at their current facilities, as well as what can be reused, what is the value of reused equipment that we're going to move into the new facilities. You can see just a little chunk of the list that's up there on the screen, and it goes on for several pages. But can we itemize what those items are? What do we need to purchase new? What can we move from current facilities? And from putting that together of all the equipment, as well as the technology equipment for the project, computers, monitors, all that side of things, almost a $700,000 value of equipment that is being reused or relocated into the new facility. We don't have to buy new. So Bit of a challenge to get our arms around all that, and we've been able to do that and really figure out what value that's going to bring to the project. Schedule-wise, so here's the overall schedule for the project. You can kind of see that line going down, not quite through the middle. That's pretty close to today's date. And everything to the left of that line is what has occurred, what's happened really since September of last year. And then the phases that we're going into now with the final documents, the bid process, and getting under construction. You can also see we track pretty closely the winter months. When are we going to hit winter during construction? What kind of aspects are that going to bring to the project? Do we have winter protection costs? Some of those kinds of items. But here you can just see an overall schedule to give you a few of the milestones. Back in August of last year is when project advocates were brought on board, the team selection, the council approval to move forward. We completed the schematic design and pre-construction process in December, design development in February. 50% CDs has been pretty recent here in March. And as I mentioned, the 95% permit set submitted late March. And here we are today to request the public hearing to be able to move the project forward. The next milestones that are coming up that you'll be able to see within the schedule is that we are looking for the council to authorize the bid process on April 24th. If that is approved and we're able to move forward, we would issue the bid documents to the general contractor community April 25th. We're scheduling a mandatory pre-bid conference for 10 o'clock over at the Mid-America Center for contractors and subcontractors on May 2nd. We were planning on setting the bid date at May 25th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Open bid process that we'd open the bids and read them aloud on the 2nd. And then we have about a week after that to analyze the bids, go through and make our team recommendations on who we think the award should be made to be able to bring that back to council for an award for June 12th is what the plan is, trying to match up with your schedule moving forward. We're contemplating a groundbreaking ceremony for Saturday, June 17th. Still lots of details and figure that schedule out here in the near future, but at least to be able to start getting it on people's calendars and thinking about that process, and made it for a Saturday to try to get everybody's involvement that we can, and then to actually start construction about June 26th. The last piece, the kind of the future milestones or the completion, if we start construction June 26th, we have we're projecting about a 17-month construction duration for the project. We'd be able to start the furniture, cubicles, desks, and chairs and start that move-in equipment and the commissioning process in early December of 2018. Substantial completion, as I think a lot of you know, is a real key date to have a certificate of occupancy, be able to actually move people and have beneficial use and occupancy of the facility by early November of 2018, to start move-in there shortly thereafter, and then really have a final completion, full occupancy, full operations by early December of 2018. That's what our plan is. So, and really already thinking through the process of turning the lights on and fully operational in the new facility before we turn the lights off, and non-operational in the prior facility, and how that's all going to work. So that's a little bit on the schedule. With that, I'll turn things over to Ken Hinton of Hafer Wysocki Architects to talk a little bit about these beautiful storyboards and the plans and how that's all come together on the project. Ken?
Great, thanks, Brad. I don't have any slides up there, so that's a good thing. I do have a few boards here, and I'm willing to really answer any questions that you have. We've met together several times in the past, and so I'm receptive to answering almost any question that you've got if I know the answer. To kind of start out with, I heard a couple of comments from people here and maybe a couple of council people as they came in that it's a beautiful building, and humbly, we say thank you for looking at it that way, but it's just a good testament to you. You don't have to spend a lot of extra money to make a building look beautiful. The forms are very simple. The building expands perfectly in the future. So, who knows what this building is going to be like 50 or 70 years from now, what the needs are going to be as Council Bluffs continues to grow and the population grows here in this area. So, and that's a good thing. You've got enough site there, you've got enough an expandable building so that you don't have to throw this building away like so many communities I've seen over the past 20 or 30 years that I've been in this business. It's just really a great foundation that you placed out here. We do have a couple of night renderings that we've shown here, just briefly, because the building will have a little bit of a glowing effect just on the front at night, but the rest of the site will kind of lay down, so it's not going to look like a Walmart sitting out there with things. We got just a few lights that are going to have some dramatic effect, but we're looking at maybe 15 or 20 fixtures across the entire project that are going to cause it to glow. The parking lots will, as you're out there, will be lit up. Safety is a really important issue, not only for the public, but for the staff as well. So I'm not saying that you just won't be able to see the light fixtures from the distance. So a little bit about the site. I'll kind of start here. The chief mentioned that even building efficiency or orientation can have an impact on the energy efficiency of the building, and the number we've utilized is about 3 to 5% decrease in energy costs just by using glass in the right areas, orienting the building. And actually, the building has been oriented this way for a couple of reasons. I know you've all been out there and driven up this road, and this road is going to create a nice, beautiful reception for the building. But we really wanted to slide the building down to this end of the property as much because the public parking, and you can still see a lot of green space around here, doesn't have a huge need. We have the ability to expand this parking lot, but I think we have 59 stalls out there, which is going to be plenty for community events and things like that. If you ever felt a need to expand more, you could always put some in very easily. But the real area we're trying to leave is all this area back in the back so that the police could build a couple of future buildings if they needed them for some reason, so they can expand the footprint here in some of this green area as the building expands. And so if they need some more parking, they have the ability to do that. And I think that was kind of the key. So knowing we wanted to push this building clear to the south and still be oriented toward the entryway, we kind of oriented the building here, and you can kind of see on this picture here, the design concept was to make the building reach out to the communities that are coming in. The city didn't really want to put it up on the hill and make it look like they were the cloud domineer over the whole city. But still, with the two-story walkout, or the two-story walkout basement concept, we were able to expose the end of the building, really orient it toward the entrance here, but at the same time, give this almost a perfect orientation for solar gain. So you can see the little shadow coming on the front of the building there from that large canopy. That's the winter sun will come in underneath that canopy and give us some natural lighting and allow some heat gain to come into that space. But in the summertime, that big canopy will cut off all the shadow, all the sun rays on that glass, causing your air conditioning costs to drop dramatically. So the combination of things like that, I'm really excited about, because I know energy efficiency is a huge issue with this city. We talked about the geothermal system that's going in there, and you already got the analysis. And just for the record, this product that you've got, this whole benchmark is a step above what the building code would recommend. The building code is at a certain level, then you benchmark it up with the program that you've got, and we're even going beyond that. So in this budget, you're going to end up having a building that is really economical to operate forever. And that's a great thing. So I really applaud you as a city for doing things like that. I wasn't planning on going into a lot of detail about the floor plans. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions. The upper floor of the building has got a nice sized community room that could be used for an EOC. It's got a lot of technology. It could be used for training. It could be used for outside events, for outside agencies to come in. You name it. It's got a lot, and it's got a great orientation off the lobby, so it can be fully utilized without actually having to come into the depths of the police station. Administration, records, the investigation division, some of their specialty divisions are all upstairs. Downstairs, coming in from the back side on the lower level, the patrol staff with their locker rooms, they're bringing their gear in and out, weapons, things like that, bringing property in and out of there is all extremely efficient on that big parking lot that sticks out the back. And I think probably the biggest thing you're gonna see, not only will you have parking at this new facility, which I'm sure is gonna be a nice thing for you, but just the efficiency of staff being next to each other, the adjacencies being correct, the ease of getting things in and out, the right report writing spaces, things like that. And in here, we've also got locker rooms, the patrol staff is down here, nice exercise room, sally porch so they don't, so they can bring property in, and then of course, property storage that will handle their property needs for quite some time in the future. And again, with the systems that are available now, you don't necessarily expand the room, you make them accordion-like the accordion files, so we can take these, ideally we take these units that we have, set them right in a rack so we can squeeze them together if you ever got to the point where you needed it. You know what I mean? So that, from that standpoint, a lot of the things are being designed to expand right in place with the footprint that you've got now, and with very minimal costs, you know, that need to be incurred 50, 60, 70 years from now. So those are all great things. With that said, any questions?
These materials here, is there anything proprietary or close hold in this document? Or I was wondering if we could get this material downloaded and posted online on the city website. So I think that would help facilitate the public hearing quite a bit.
Provide it to the clerk's office and post it there.
Oh,
Is that what you're asking for?
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
I know that there is stuff on the police webpage.
We have had so little traffic on that I have
Okay.
not taken the time to update it because nobody's going to it. So we've been a little, well, this gives you an idea. This is just the plans that were turned in
Yep.
for permits. And these.
And there were 5 sets total, so the guy hauling them in was a little tired.
These are the instructions to the bidder and all the specs. Then there's the specs. I'm gonna drop something in for the building.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of detail that we've gone to make sure we get it right for the citizens, so
Yeah.
that's where we're at. That information's been provided to the clerk's office. There will be some minor changes. I've already talked to the fire department, and they said they want to move a couple of hydrants around. The minor changes like that. A couple other things before we close. I failed to mention somebody that's been completely in the middle of this the whole time, even though he's been awfully busy in the process, and that's Matt Cox. He's been a great resource every time we needed something, and he dropped what he was doing at the time. I didn't tell Greg that, but he's been very helpful all the way through. Before we close real quickly, I just wanted to add, we appreciate your help in the process of making sure that we provide a clear picture of what's gone into the project up to this point. We've scheduled an executive session to allow council members to ask questions or to look at detailed parts of the plan that are more security-based or tactical-based. And we'd be glad to do that if you want to hold that. If not, just let me know and we'll scratch that off. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the 24th and hope to have some good news at that point. Other questions?
I just had one question about the roof system. Is it a flat roof system? And if so, what type of materials will be used to maintain that? They typically have issues in the Midwest with a flat roof.
You bet you do. You know, it's not, although it is relatively flat, it's not considered a flat roof.
Okay,
You
good.
know, it's not dead flat, the building codes won't allow that, but the pitch is 1/4 inch per foot. So, you know, you can see how far, what the slope is, it's very low slope. And it all slopes toward the back of the building, and then it's gonna come down downspouts and put into a storm sewer system so that we don't flood out the neighbors. We've got detention ponds and things on the site, so we're not gonna increase the flow, the water offlow from this parking lot and things we're putting in there. The roofing material itself is called, it's a TPO is the short term, thermoplastic olefin, I think is the technical name. And it's a very affordable roof. When LEED design became a high priority, the TPO roof became it just overtook the entire area in the Midwest. It was affordable. It's much more durable than single membrane roofs were, the old EPDM roofs and things like that. You could walk on this maybe with track spikes and maybe not be able to punch through unless you're stomping on it. I mean, you can punch through any kind of roof. It will have a 20-year warranty, and in 20 or 30 years, you probably will need to be replaced. But it's a fairly simple process. As far as we know, there's nothing in the system that is going to be like an asbestos product that's going to be hard to deal with. You can even overlay layers over the top of it because it has a lightweight, and of course the insulation underneath is an extremely high R value. So that can be, hopefully can be reused as well. So,
Thank you.
We did look at a pitched roof earlier on that would have sat on top of this one, but we took that out as a cost savings measure because we believed that this was going to be the best thing for us to do right now.
Just without looking at a full set of plans or specs, it was hard to tell if it was a complete flat roof with the bladder type. So no, this is good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would encourage you to take 5 minutes in executive session so we can talk about a couple other things if possible, but I'll leave that to you.
That's fine.
Any other
Other
questions?
questions? All right,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Second item on the study session agenda is the finance director position, and Wendy, are you introducing Kathy?
Hello, I would like to introduce Kathy Knott. She comes to us with her most recent experience from Conagra Foods for about 19 years in financial leadership positions there. Kathy, did you want to, welcome to say anything or talk about your past at all?
Council Bluffs is my hometown, although I worked downtown Omaha for Conagra for, as Wendy said, almost 20 years. Exited there last year in their move of the headquarters, and excited about starting with the city and bringing my experience, not only with Conagra, but in public accounting to this position.
Any questions?
Questions for me? Welcome.
No questions for you. I was just kind of curious, how many applicants did we have?
Total, or how many did we?
Interview, yeah. That's what I was
Well,
gonna say, we had more than we interviewed.
Okay, let's start with the big number, I guess.
What was the total, John, do you know?
Around 20.
Around 20?
Okay. Okay. Did any of those applicants have any municipal or government finance experience, or? Okay. Were any of those candidates interviewed? Okay. Thank you.
I think 3, maybe. Any other questions? All right, review agenda. Anything on the consent agenda? Kind of, while you're looking through that, Patty, you want to step up? We gave you a little different financial report, and Patty wanted to kind of tell you how she organized that, and
There you go.
Okay. Well, we were a little bit behind in getting you your list of bills and the financial reports, didn't anticipate having a staff shortage, so. But what we did do on the financial statements, where we compare the actual to the budget, we revised that a little bit because it takes a long time to create the reports that you've been getting, and we needed more of a working tool at this point, being shorthanded, and we wanted to create something that compared the actual dollars back to the actual budget that was submitted to the state, and you recognize that from what we just did for fiscal year 18. I've noticed some items that we need to reclassify a little bit, so it's not exact right now. It's still a work in progress, but I anticipate getting February and March to you at the next meeting, and then I'm sure Kathy will have a lot of input, and we can probably get, maybe a better tool for you, but this is more of a working tool for us for our budget amendments coming forward. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have
so
any.
it listed the bills both alphabetically and in descending order of expense, and then kind of showed you what line items off of the state budget form that that those correlate to, so you can kind of get a feel and reference back to the state budget form if you so desire.
Yeah, and that's new, but again, we went over that state form in a lot of detail with you in the last couple of months, and I think going forward, you might want to see that. Whether that's the report we're bringing forward to you in these meetings, I don't know, but it will always be available from us.
Any questions for Patty?
No? Okay.
Thank you for that. You preempted my question. That was perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions on the consent agenda? Anything on the public hearings? How about any of the ordinances? Either first or second?
Just kind of more of a comment than a question. I got with Mr. Carmichael about the changes to the codes. And I've made this point before, and I thank Mr. Carmichael for helping me out with this. This is the summary of this is just the significant changes between the current codes and what we're transitioning to. And suffice it to say, when I visited last week, I only had one of these because the other two weren't yet available in the inspector's office. Now I don't offer that as a ding against the inspection office or against the building division. The observation is that we have a lot of changes here that impact a lot of people, and it's good to have kind of a bit of a advanced read as to what those changes are, and Mr. Carmichael's obviously in the best position as to advise to that. But then we have a responsibility in voting for these ordinance changes to ourselves kind of understand what's the so what are the major changes, and we don't really have that at this point. Now, in talking to the experts, not only Mr. Carmichael but others that I've been reaching out to, they don't know they can't identify any specific negative impacts, but they're in the process of going through these things too. So as we vote to consider whether or not we're going to adopt a set of codes and hold others responsible for complying with that code, with those codes, it would be helpful, in as much as it's possible, to have a little bit better of an idea of what the significant changes are, so that we as the elected representatives who vote on this thing have an idea, and in turn the public can have a little bit better idea of what the big changes are. So again, ask Mr. Carmichael and your staff, keep up the good work, but we need to try and put this into a form that we can all read and kind of understand and kind of have a good idea of what it is that we're voting for. But thank you for that.
Al, are you suggesting that we postpone, just so I understand it? I'm getting that that might be your implication. I want to make sure I understand.
I don't think so, based upon what I actually cracked one of these open and started reading it over the weekend. And I didn't see any obvious problems. Mr. Carmichael spent some time talking with me about it.
Right.
He didn't think that there were specific issues. I talked to some other folks. They were kind of of the same opinion. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't think that there's a need to postpone.
Okay.
I'm just saying that as we adopt these codes by reference, we're making them applicable to a lot of people.
Indeed.
And it's just kind of a good idea that we all have a little bit better understanding of what it is that we're voting on and
Thank you.
asking the rest of the city to comply with.
I appreciate that.
There's only one set of those books that list what the updates are going to be to it. So if you could maybe send out to Jody and let her know when you've gotten done with them so that we can pass them through.
Yeah, I told him that he would have them back today, so.
Okay, wonderful, thank
Steve,
you.
is there an executive summary? Obviously, there's great detail and
Which one of the 970 pages would you like?
Yeah. Yeah, because each one of these books is entitled Significant Changes to, then pick your code.
So that is
So-
the executive summary, or?
Yes. I had looked at another copy, and just in general, over the last couple iterations of the building code that's put out by that organization, and as a layman, and I certainly am a tinkerer, but layman in that subject, is it fair to say that, as a general rule, I'll just take electrical for an example, that there's a trend towards making things safer in the sense of requiring things to be done in a different way, or requiring, for example, like even the number of wires in a box, in a conduit or in an electrical box, to be less than what used to be permissible. Things that would make things safer. That's how I read it, but I'm not an expert in this subject.
You're correct, Mr. Watson, and part of the problem that we as the city of Council Bluffs are going to deal with, and the state of Iowa for that matter.
Steve, can you come up, because they need to hear you on the,
Thank you, I apologize for talking in the back of the room. Part of the problem that we're dealing with is the state never adopted the 2012 code. We are going from the 2009 to the 2015, so we're dealing with 6 years of upgrades in technology, in code, development of new products, like we were talking about a roof system earlier. There's a tremendous quantity of codified language that we are going to have to deal with, not only from the building community or the permits and inspections community, but also for the design community. We are dealing with some buildings down on River's Edge Park right now where they have not yet submitted for a permit like we did on the police station. So we know that building is designed to the 2000 International Building Code. If we adopt these codes, we may have run into a situation where an architect and a developer have spent significant amounts of money and time in the development of a set of plans that are 6 years out of date. So in answer to Mr. Ringenberg's question, we will work with developers and designers throughout the next 4, 5, 6 months. If they have been in the process of development of a building component or a building plan on a specific code, there's no reason to make them go back and redesign a building simply because the city of Council Bluffs adopted a new code.
Okay.
So there will be a transition period between this, and its significance is going from 2009 to 2015. There's just a lot of information that we're all going to have to absorb. Most of the design community is designed to the 2015 codes anyway.
Do we need to make this ordinance or the changes active as of a future date then, in order for you to be able to work with those?
I don't believe so, Mrs. White. I think you give me the authority to deal with the design community on a common sense basis, and I have no problems doing with that. As long as, what I ask a designer to do is to submit a document to me stipulating that they've begun design on a building based on a code. We've gone through preliminary meetings with them. At that point in time, I'm very comfortable with our ability to enforce an existing code.
and then the last time we did this was before the state, maybe 2 times ago, so don't correct me when I'm wrong, but they, we had different trades that were represented by boards here in the city, plumber's board, the mechanical board, that kind of reviewed it and gave us some feedback. Do you have a trades board group that's had a chance to look at it that, I think Mr. Ringenberg's exactly right, the people that deal with it. If I read it, in lots of cases, it's not germane to what I do on a daily basis, and get caught up in some of the language that somebody in the business would maybe look at and say, that's going to be a problem or not a problem.
Several years ago, Mayor, we asked for input from our separate boards, the plumbing, mechanical, and electrical, and building boards. In the time since I have been the building official for the City of Council Bluffs, the state has adopted the plumbing and mechanical board and charged them with providing amendments to the state of Iowa, and they arbitrarily adopt it. They don't arbitrarily adopt it, but what they do is they recommend to the legislative body that the code is automatically adopted without going through local codes. Our city code, conversely, says the same thing. Once the state adopts the electrical, plumbing, or mechanical code, we automatically adopt it. There is no public hearing for that. There is nothing. The city adopts it. It never comes before the city council. This is the only set of documents that we have not changed, and I believe Mr. Ringenberg brought that point up at the last council meeting, that there should be an issue, there may be an issue with that. I personally believe that it's good to have a public hearing on a building code document, or an electrical or plumbing or mechanical code. I don't have that ability through the city code or the state statute at this point, though. So in the conscription of a code, this to me is about as open as it gets, Mr. Ringenberg. We allow any builder to come into a public hearing for the citizens and for their representatives and to speak their piece about the adoption of the code, or even whether they're pro or con against the code. They don't have that ability with the plumbing, mechanical, or electrical codes.
No, and I take your point on that, and it's a very constructive one. I was just thinking out loud when I asked the city attorney whether or not this was necessary, but I think you make a valid point that it's worthwhile to have the vote in public, and giving people an opportunity have a chance to review this is equally, if not even more important. And that kind of was driving to my point, is that you know, in order for us to have that public discussion and for the public to understand what it is that we're voting on, we need to have something that's a little bit more digestible for us lay people to kind of start to understand, and then hopefully that will trigger the greater minds, the experts in the business like yourself, or some of those experienced in building trades, to take a deeper dive in advance on these things and advise us, because there may well be something in there that might cause someone opportunity for concern, and having a chance to review those in advance is everything.
Every change that you see, every significant change or insignificant change, goes through a process of evaluation at the local and national level. And that is by architects, engineers, building officials, the building industry, every single entity in the United States that has a hammer or a hand in the game has an opportunity to comment and to vote on proposed changes before the International Code Council. These aren't just arbitrary submissions that get into the code. Everyone votes on them, and the majority wins. So these are systems that have been evaluated and evaluated and evaluated over many, many months and sometimes years before they're finally approved to get into the code. And they also keep up with the technology that is ever increasing. If there ever comes a day where I don't learn something new in a building code, I think that's the day I need to retire.
Well, great. And again, having an opportunity for folks locally to be able to review this is again quite helpful. I appreciate your point about the International Code Council. Said it before, you know, we're not Spokane, we're not Chicago, we're Council Bluffs. So I want to make sure that this means something to folks locally. So that's why I brought it up.
Means quality construction too.
All right, any other questions for Steve?
On both the 6B and C, since they're uniform codes that we're adopting, we will have to set them for a public hearing on the 24th.
Okay.
On the, no other ordinances on first, I'd like to talk about ordinance on second. I have some constructive comments. We're on to something I do know more about. This is what I do in my day job, is write this kind of stuff. And you either love that or feel pity for me, one or the other. But I enjoy it, but I'm strange like that. All right. So the first thing, and I was confusing it, we were talking a little bit earlier, and Matt had mentioned, the last meeting, I was confusing this myself. They're two separate concepts, and I'm going to do my best to not confuse the two. The first is, you know, there are a lot of court cases around the country, defining what a family is for purposes of where folks live. For example, like R1 designation. If in this day and age, 2017, you tried to make R1 designation be the traditional nuclear family of a wife, a husband, and 2.1 kids and the dog, that hasn't really survived constitutional attacks in many places because people sometimes don't marry in the formal sense. We have common law marriage in Iowa, in the few states left to have it, but or don't even do that. They make that choice, or or they might have extended family there, and so there's that concern of you can't zone people out of living in large swaths of a community because they don't fit your ideal of, I suppose the stereotype unfairly would be the 1950s family. But that's a separate issue than when the rental ordinance triggers. And as this draft is currently written, I'll tell you what it says, and I don't think this is your intent, but when you look to commas versus semicolons, they mean different things. But in English, what it means is, so a rental property is a place that's occupied by people other than 4 exceptions, as it's currently written. The owner of records, so you're the owner on the recorded deed down at the recorder's office at the courthouse. Then you're not a rental property. Number 2, you're a member of the owner of records family, and that's one we'll really get into depth on the proposal. So, and as currently drafted, or as currently law, that would include the spouse, children, parents, grandchildren, and grandparents. So if those folks are living in the house, you're not a rental property. The other 2 exceptions, and these were part of the compromise when Sharon and I were working on this ordinance, when we recodified the whole housing title, is you're a beneficiary of a trust. Some people very legitimately, for all sorts of reasons, might put all their property into a trust. So if I had one, the Nate Watson Trust. So technically that means I don't own it anymore. Even if my trust is revocable, I can change it at will. I still don't own it. I'm no longer the owner of record. My trust is. And people do that for all sorts of reasons, sometimes for inheritance, to avoid probate, sometimes for tax or other reasons, all very legitimate. We didn't want to say that if suddenly and you often see it with, say, a widow, if Mrs. Jones has her house, she and her husband set it up so the house is in her name as a trust, suddenly she has to register. 85-year-old Mrs. Jones has to register living in her own house in regular English, but her trust owns it. Having her have to register as a rental seemed a bit silly. So that's the exception there. It's not a rental if it's your trust. And then the last one, I remember we had some significant discussion about that with a couple constituents in particular. Now I've lost my place. Oh, surviving a trust estate. So, yeah, so if somebody inherits property from their spouse, that's not a rental property either. And if you think about it, that makes complete sense. So, all right, so the rental inspection ordinance applies unless you're the owner, you're a member of the owner's family, as currently defined, or you're a beneficiary of a trust or the surviving spouse of, and the property's in a trust. All right. So this particular change would take out, so the exception that means that you wouldn't fall under the rental inspection ordinance, so it wouldn't apply to you to that particular situation. It currently says if you're the spouse, children, parents, grandchildren, or grandparent of the owner. It would change it to the following. So any of these, so when a semicolon's there, put in the word or, so only one of these has to apply, and then one of these has to exist for you to suddenly no longer have the rental inspection ordinance apply to you. Any number of people related to you by blood. There's no limiting principle there, so not to be flip about it, but we're all related by blood. So, the current list limits it, I think, to the second or, I always forget which, it's the second or third degree of consanguinity, but in English.
So
Yeah.
before we go to the next semicolon.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
Dick help me write it. So
sure.
Really, that was to add brother and sister on there, because right now it just reads mom, dad,
Sure.
grandkids. So that's where the blood
Gotcha.
came, because so we can, I mean, I would be open to changing that to just adding brother and sister to the family.
That might be the simplest way to do it. And then the other one would be marriage, which spouse currently, I think, incorporates. And then you've got these other things where courts create a relationship where there wouldn't be a quote-unquote natural one. That is, when somebody has a kid, you're the natural parent by law, unless you lose those rights. You always are that person's parent, and as long as they're a minor, you have control over them and custody and so forth. So those are the somewhat modern ways of, other than having the child quote-unquote naturally, and that's a legal word, it's not a value judgment. So you have adoption, you have guardianship, so you don't fully have, haven't fully adopted, but a court's given you, at least for now, the rights of a parent and the duties of a parent over somebody, or even an adult. You know, it could be you have a great aunt who can't take care of herself anymore and needs to be watched and helped. You could be her guardian. A court could point you. And then a duly authorized custodial relationship, I assume that means some sort of court-authorized power to act for somebody else. So, and again, maybe on the current list, you could say the spouse, children, parents, grandchildren, grandparents, brother and sister, wherever you want to put in the list. You know, as to those other ways of individuals, I was struggling to think of a way to say that. I mean, sometimes they'd be a dependent, but that's probably not the best way to describe it. But I think you could encompass that within the list, and I'd really have to think about it. But the part that I think after that I think goes way beyond what you intend is, remember in statutes the dictionary applies so regular English applies unless you define something. And if you define something in a way that's even 180 degrees completely different than regular English, then that definition applies, even if it's not intuitive. So this would say a family would also include two unrelated people. So let me put that into an example. I own a house and I rent it out to two unrelated people. As written currently, this would allow those two unrelated people to be a part of my family. And since they would be a part of my family per this specific definition, they would be exempted from the rental property ordinance. It's not requiring even one of them to be related to me. I don't think that's what you mean, but that's what it says. And then the next one would be those two unrelated people again, and then any children related to either of them. So I think what that would do is, as long as in every unit I rented, as long as there were no more than two adults there who weren't married or otherwise related, the rental ordinance would never apply. So I think you would basically take out the vast majority of rentals would no longer, it'd be the exception that swallowed the rule. So I think maybe those got in there because of the concept of, like what I was talking about before, that different thing where you can't tell people who don't fit the traditional nuclear family, they can't live in this part of town. All we're doing here is saying, the rental inspection applies, the rental ordinance applies if you don't meet certain exceptions. This exception, though, I just think is way too big and goes beyond what you intend. The only other way to do this, by the way, and we didn't talk much about it, and I'm not even sure we did, but when I was writing it, the only other way I could think of to have exceptions to when the rental ordinance applies is if you charge rent or you let someone live there for free. That's the other way. The problem with that way, and there's certainly some appeal to that, because I think that's what we're getting at here. But the problem with that is it's objectively a lot harder to prove somebody's not, use the negative, not paying, as opposed to, it's a lot easier for me to prove I'm married to somebody or that somebody's my brother than it is for me to prove that I'm not paying. I mean, then to give ridiculous links, does that mean I have to submit a certified financial statement, copies of my bank account statements, all these things to prove as best as you possibly could, if you're not paying in cash or bartering, that I'm not paying rent. We would have to so get involved in tenants' lives that doesn't. So in the end, I think trying to prove something doesn't exist, that is somebody's not paying, is far harder to prove and more invasive than just proving who you are and how you relate. And, you know, Sharon had a good point, and I looked at some other cities as well. If you look just within the context of the rental ordinance in cities that have rental ordinances, they limit it to, as a general rule in this state, to if you're not the owner of record, it's a rental. So if the owner's not living there, so, you know, and there's a lot of sense to that, really, because if you're married to someone, if your spouse is living there, you're probably living there too, as the owner of record, and probably in this day and age, I'd like to think that the wife would also be the owner of the house too. So, you know, so our ordinance already gets you out of being a rental, being part of the rental inspection if the owner of record doesn't live there, but as long as the spouse, children, parents, grandchildren, and grandparents are there. You know, I'm, and now to my opinion, if I could, you know, I would be open to thinking about brother or sister. I don't know. You know, there's something to be said for that. But beyond that, I think you will have the exception swallow the rule. And because as originally drafted, it was up to 4 unrelated people, but it's and I see it's down to 2, which I think is good. But I just don't think that's what's intended, but that's what's written.
Well, I guess if I could come back and just revisit the question of what's the nature of the problem that we're seeking to fix with the change, and then kind of go back on the discussion from there, because as I understood it, the reason for the proposal was to add a little bit more flexibility to individuals who wanted to make their property available to others as an act of benevolence, almost, if you will, or some sort of charitable act. So if I have a friend that has taken ill, is in need of a place to live for whatever reason, and I want to make a property available to him, do I have the ability as the owner of that property to do that for a friend or a relative, to basically let them live there rent-free for as long as I deem fit? Now, have I kind of misstated that?
No, yeah, almost like I mean, yeah, exactly. Somebody that needs, that doesn't have, there's no monetary exchange or monetary value to it. You know what I mean? It's like you said, almost more charitable.
Yeah.
And then really to add brother and sister, that was the intent of why I brought it forward.
Well, and Nate's point was, in order to really prove that up, you got to get a certified copy of their tax return, and
How do I prove you didn't pay in cash, or you didn't provide you cut down some trees for me, or, you know, bartered? It's really tough to prove a negative. And that's the tough part. And if I were a tenant, and I have been in my life before, if you told me I had to give copies of my bank statements to the government building official, I would have a problem with it.
And there's nothing in there to indicate it has to be, you know, any type of circumstance, just up to 2 people, so, and their children. So you could literally make every rental property in Council Bluffs that has mom, a dad, and 2 kids that aren't related to you not fall under the rental inspection program. I mean, because there's nothing in there that says if they're not paying rent or anything else, just doesn't apply anymore.
Well, I'm open to changing it. Again, the intent was to add brother and sister.
Right. Yeah,
And then more of a, and I don't know how you prove it. And again, I had Dick help me write it because I hadn't.
Sure.
the particular case is the The gentleman lived across the street from his parents. He's had a change in life status. The house was vacant. He said to his sister, move in to my house, keep an eye on mom and dad, and I won't charge any rent.
Right.
And that's his sister.
Yeah, and I think it should be for brother and sister too, because I think that happens probably more than you realize it does. You have.
But then there was a second situation for that person, which
Yeah.
was more like what
More of a
Councilmember
charitable deal,
Ringenberg was
right.
talking about.
And I
that's
think
the
he-
one-
And that's tough.
He understood
That's
that
tough.
struggle with that one.
That one might be tough to square that circle because other than proving that you didn't have to pay, and it's so hard to prove you didn't do something. I struggle to see how because we'd have to find a way to write it so that everybody knew what the law was if they looked, and it applied equally to everybody.
Right.
And so sometimes, and I'm not being flip about it, but, a bad or a difficult case makes bad law. Sometimes,
Right.
the result of a law in a given case is not great. And I agree, if somebody's letting somebody live somewhere rent-free as an act of kindness, obviously I'd love to encourage that.
And that's the
But
thing.
how do we do that without
Wouldn't that
keeping the
make them-
barn door open?
We've covered it with your beneficiary and your
That's-
trust. I think if somebody really wants to get in that position,
Well,
they
that's
should
true.
put the house in a trust and grant
That's
a
tr-
life.
You could grant a life
Versus
estate.
Or the
true.
guardianship part. I mean, if you are giving somebody, if you're paying for their rent and utilities and everything, then to some point, that makes them
A dependent.
a dependent. And that would show on your tax return as
prove
a
it.
owner. And if you wanted to, that's why I'm almost wondering is if in a case like that, should we not have some type of a policy that says that, if you, as an owner, bring forward your tax return, you show this person as a dependent on your taxes, then, we could waive the rental inspection for that purpose. Make it, right now, we're changing an entire law for one person's particular unique situation, and it's going to basically nullify the rental inspection law the way it's currently written, and I don't know how to write it differently.
And it's not a huge dollar amount. We're talking, what, $35 a year? So
Well, that's it, and I don't know why you would be against getting it. If you're letting somebody you care about live in one of your properties, and it costs you $35 a year to register it and have it inspected, unless you're letting somebody that's dear to you live in a property that's dangerous and unhealthy,
But
what
there's a
would
lot
be
of
the
little
problem?
quirks to it. I mean, I think sometimes it can be livable and still wouldn't necessarily meet the rental. I mean, sometimes there's little things we live with probably on a daily basis that you can't if you're trying to do it. I mean, I think that I can see the point of why you went on the hassle with it. Especially if it is a no income. I mean, you're not making anything off it and then you're having to go through the headache and.
I understand what you're saying, I just don't know how to write it to.
I
don't know how
wasn't
to write it
inclined, I
either.
wasn't inclined to depend it before, but it is objectively provable because it'd be on your tax return. And, if somebody wants, and it would be the tax return of the owner. So if they're wanting to give it, by definition, they're asking for legislative grace, if you will. And so they would be the party with the burden to show that tax return. It wouldn't be the tenant. I would prefer, and I didn't think so before, but based on this discussion, I think I would prefer dependent as opposed to just brother and sister. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes you'll have, not only someone's spouse and their kids, but you go up and down the tree, straight up or straight down. It's not unheard of course, to have, your grandparents living with you, or your grandkids living with you. When you start getting into collateral relatives like your aunts and uncles, or even brothers and sisters, if your sister is not, like my sister, if she's not my dependent, but she just happens to be in one of my buildings, and she's also an adult, at what point then, if I'm letting people live in there, should that structure be subject to the health and safety laws? If it's my family in the sense of literally, if I were married, spouse and kids, or straight up the tree to grandparents, or straight down the tree to grandkids, that's really the house unit. If we start going into like your cousins or your cousin's second cousin once removed, I think we're getting away from the narrow exception that was crafted. And in other places, the owner of record has to live there. And we've already broadened it to people that go up the tree and down the tree. I think, and a dependent would be definitely down the tree.
We could do dependent and then do brother, sister, and then that would kind of cover.
But part of the problem I've got is, as written then, let's say I let my sister live in a house, because we don't talk about renting, and again, I don't know of a way of operationalizing somebody living there for free or not and having to prove that you're not paying. Let's say if I let my sister live in a rental I owned, and I charged her rent, then the rental inspection ordinance wouldn't apply. I think it's natural to assume that if it's my house and my spouse or kids or grandparents or grandkids are living there, I'm not charging them rent.
But the way it reads.
But do people naturally assume that if you let your sibling live in a house, is it as natural to assume that you're not going to charge them a cent?
I think it
I
could
don't
be depending on
think
the
so.
situation. I think there's probably more situations than you realize where that could happen.
Oh,
I
I
really
think-
do. I mean,
and I
it's
think-
like there's a
But
lot
if
of
you
times
could
where
do that, you could legitimately claim them as a dependent on your tax return because you're providing more than half of their.
But in this particular case, I don't think that's gonna, the case I just outlined,
Yeah.
this person probably works, probably has their own bills, probably pays their own bills. They just said, hey,
Right,
so you're close if mom and dad need you,
yeah.
stay in my house.
Well,
Yeah.
it already
I think
reads
there's
mom
times
and dad. If
Yeah.
mom and dad live in a house that I would own.
But mom and dad don't
Mom and
live
dad
in
live
that
across the
house, they
street
live
from the
across-
house.
Right, yeah, I think
Right.
brother, sister is a natural, I mean, I think that.
I guess family to me is mom,
Yeah.
dad, brother, sister. That, I mean, and that's not going cousins or what, like you're saying. That's,
Would
family,
we,
me.
my concern would be the classic slippery slope is if we start doing that, I wouldn't want to see in 2 years' time us come back and say first cousins should also be exempt, and then second cousins, and then second cousins once removed.
I wouldn't, to me, family, and we can even put immediate family if you want in that. I mean, I don't know if that makes a difference. To me, common knowledge, I guess.
Is there a legal term for close blood relationship?
Well, there are degrees of consanguinity.
You talk about degrees
That's
of
the word I was looking
consanguinity,
for.
but I think you're better off.
I don't even know that
following through with what you started here.
A listing's better in
Brothers,
English.
sisters, The ones that you're really
Brothers,
trying to
sister dependent.
pinpoint, and stop it there, and then kind of close the door, if that's.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can.
You'd want it in
you
English,
can-
yeah.
Yeah, whatever word Nate said. Yeah. He said.
Those are rings of
Consanguinity.
consanguinity blood, like how closely, what's the degree, like you're less related to your cousin than
Yeah,
your
so
brother.
let's have Dick write it up as, like you said, that circle, mom, dad, brother, sister, if that's
Dependent,
if that's
method.
possible. I mean, I would be okay with that, Nate, if you are.
I'd have to think about brother, sister. I'm inclined to agree with dependent, but I don't
That
know
would be
about brother,
brother,
sister.
Yeah, I think it should say
I-
brother, sister,
I-
independent.
I think it should.
And I appreciate we can't bind future councils, but I probably would want some assurance that that's not a first attempt to then suddenly add cousins. At
You
le-
can-
at
you have
least
my
by-
assurance.
By you,
For
yes.
sure. You have my
Okay.
assurance.
I appreciate we can't bind the
No,
government.
yeah, I mean, I like my cousins, but not that much.
Yeah, I think you have a different level to a brother, sister.
Well, I
Well,
think,
I like
you
my
know,
sister too, but rent-free, I don't know.
we're trying to build language that provides a little bit more flexibility. And I think with Mr. Wade's advice, I think we can come up with something that kind of helps define that we're trying to give a little bit more latitude to this, and I think that provides at least a basis for Mr. Carmichael's office to take a look at things on a case-by-case basis as in his professional experience, where he can say, this doesn't quite pass the smell test, or I know this particular landlord and the situation's been explained to me, and I'm kind of satisfied with that. So if we're building a regimen or some language that provides, I guess the operative word here is I'm looking for is a little bit of flexibility
I see.
for him to try and meet the intent of the inspection ordinance without resulting in unintended consequences for a landlord or a family that's trying to engage in an act of benevolence and charity for someone who's got a rough patch going on in their lives.
Could we maybe, would the appropriate, this would probably, unless you disagree, this would probably be more restrictive. Would it be better to postpone rather than move to third? Because I think then we'd have to have a fourth reading anyway, wouldn't we? if we make that
Yeah,
sort
we
of
would.
change?
Unless the change is made tonight. Now,
I
what
say,
I
can we
thought,
make it before
you
tonight?
know, what I do is, after this study session, I put the definition of family together.
Oh, I
bring it
see.
Back down to you tonight. If we're close, good. If we're not, good. I mean, we'll.
Oh, okay.
I just
sounds
want to
good.
know, are we changing the definition of family in our municipal code, or are we changing the
think so.
definition of family under the definition of rental property?
Under rental property.
Under rental property only,
Right,
In
that's what
fact,
I'm trying to make
In
sure.
our zoning code, we do not even define family.
which is really smart in this day and age, probably.
Right, I was, yeah. wouldn't
I
want
mean,
it,
because you can't suddenly say you're not the right kind of family to live in an R1.
no.
The days of that being legal are
Just
long
specific
past.
under rental, yeah.
Yeah. And last time, I was getting involved in the confusion on that one too, because they use a lot of similar words.
I'm sure.
Other questions on any of the ordinances?
Back here.
No.
Anything on the resolutions?
See,
Real quick, back to the ordinances. Larry, this
Oh,
is.
yes, I do. Sorry.
This is one of those, we talked about that maybe we'd sit down and look at some of these different things a while back that might be a little bit different that we want to look at. In the code, in Title 13, yeah. I haven't approached yet for the IFC, but that would be in the IFC as well. Okay.
I'm
Under the
sorry.
resolutions? We done with the,
Yep.
all right.
Oh, if I could, on F, the financial hardship policy, I am not an expert in Iowa Medicaid. I know the federal law pretty well in Nebraska, which unfortunately won't help with this, but I'm pretty sure, as written, one of the tweaks I'd suggest is one of the ways to establish, just bluntly put, and I don't mean it as a value judgment, if you're poor enough to have this policy apply, or possibly apply, so you don't have to pay, one of the ways you could show that is if you show you're Medicaid eligible, as I read it, but, and then that would waive us trying to collect, I think is how it's written. My concern with that is if you are on Medicaid, as a matter of federal law, emergency transportation is paid for, and depending on what Iowa's match rate is, and I don't know that, the federal government kicks in over half. It's probably 50-some, 54, 53%, whatever Iowa's, I don't know it, match rate is. And then the state of Iowa is required to pay the state portion, so high 40% probably. So I don't know why we would waive, if someone's on Medicaid, why we would waive the federal and state governments paying into our city coffers when they're required by state and federal law to do so. I mean, if we waive it, they'll gladly not give us the money, but I don't know why we would turn down money. It seems to me this policy would apply in other cases if you're not on Medicaid. So basically, if you're stuck in the middle, crudely put, you're not poor enough to get Medicaid, but you don't have enough money to pay the bill, there are a good number of people stuck in between right there. You know, you make too much for Medicaid, but you don't make enough to pay the ambulance. A lot of people there, and it seems to me that's where the policy ought to allow it. Because if you can pay it, you should pay it, and if you're poor enough, you can't pay it, the federal and state governments will pay us so that the local property tax owners don't have to pay. Since they're paying their federal and state taxes, it seems to me we ought to get that money rather than someone else. So I just suggest maybe a tweak in there that we make clear somehow that you know, we're not turning down if in the language in there, I think they call it medical assistance, which is Medicaid speak for Medicaid. When you see those two words capitalized, that's federal law speak for Medicaid. That's what they call it. And it's confusing, and you'd think like an ambulance ride might not be necessarily medical assistance, but everything Medicaid does is called medical assistance. Again, it's one of those things where you define something different than its normal English. So like even if you take a taxi cab to get so-called non-emergency medical transportation, that is to get to the doctor's office, you need a taxi cab because you don't have a working car or your medical condition is such that you can't drive. Even that taxi ride is medical assistance in Medicaid speak. So I think we just need to tweak that there so we don't leave money on the table. So I'd suggest postponing that because I didn't have time to suggest, and maybe I should talk with Dick. If you're receptive to that idea, I suggest we postpone it a meeting so that we
Which
can
part are you
tweak it.
referencing, Nate?
Let me pull up.
Just to be clear, so that we're under the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
This has basically been our policy for some time.
Sure.
It's been worked on between the treasurer's office and our third-party billing company. And so basically what we're trying to do is keep this out of that determination from somebody from the fire department, because we're not experts on what the hardship is. Normally, we work with them on a payment plan and
Sure.
and move forward.
Well, the thing is for example, if you wanted Medicaid to pay for it, so Iowa Medicaid to pay for it, which again is state and federal money mixed together, a little bit more federal than state, if they see in our policy that we only take into account the person's income and assets for purposes of deciding whether we have discretion to pay, you're not taking into account their receipt of government benefits, including but not limited to medical assistance, that is Medicaid. You're only looking at, so by definition, if you're on Medicaid, you don't have a lot of income, and you have very low resources. I think in Iowa, you can only have non-excluded resources of $2,000 or lower to be on Medicaid. So you're talking people who are the poorest of the poor, who don't have much income. But if you're only looking at their income and looking at their resources, if they're on Medicaid, they're going to meet your test, and then you can consider whether or not to grant them an exception. But what you haven't looked at is the fact that they have Medicaid, and that's an available government benefit so that the feds in the state could pay for it rather than us having to eat it. So so it seems to me when you look at income and you look at resources, you ought to also look at their eligibility for medical assistance.
Where do you think we're not looking at that, Nate?
Well, if you look to the list, I should have flagged it.
Because I can tell you, just from our collection standpoint, we get plenty of Medicaid. I don't think this is in affecting. Yeah.
Sure, it's just not written that way, though, is the problem.
The reason we put this together on paper, for one thing, it was very difficult for anyone to read. And when I started in November, there were a bunch of applications laying around my office with income tax returns and things that people were waiting for answers. And it was very difficult to understand what it was. All of those issues have been addressed, but we since worked with our third-party billing people to make sure that they were clear when they were communicating with the patients. And since we've talked with them and made things very clear and simple, we have had no one apply for hardship since then. We've had a lot more payment plans. People didn't realize they could do that. They didn't know what their options were because it was so difficult to understand. Our billers actually go, we get the information at the time they're picked up, and the medics have all that stuff, and Rick Benson does an awesome job of getting to the bottom of it, make sure he has clean information when he sends it to the biller. They're filing it with him, and whenever they make a mistake, they fix it right away. So I can tell you that since we shared this with our third-party biller, we've not had to even look at any applications since then.
I'm glad to hear it. The only thing is if under federal law, if we don't take into account the receipt of Medicaid benefits, then Medicaid cannot, if they see this policy and they follow the law, they cannot pay the bill because you've told them they don't have to.
Sure, but I believe Medicaid has already contacted long before this. This is when everything else, there's nothing left. They don't have Medicaid, they don't have, for whatever reason, they have no other resources, and they come and say, can you help me out, please? My husband just died.
Yep.
I had 6 runs in the to the hospital, that type of stuff, so.
And I totally I think we agree on the end outcome here. I'm just, with the greatest respect, it doesn't say that. And so as I look at it here now, just kind of doing it on the fly, I think, so if you look under financial hardship criteria, the second sentence, perhaps you need to say something like, in making the decision whether to waive the fee, the city will compare the amount earned, living expenses, assets, debts, and eligibility for medical assistance. I think that's all it needs to say, doing a rough sketch. Because if somebody's eligible to, because what you're saying is, look, if they had Medicaid, then we wouldn't be considering to waive it. I think, though, it literally doesn't say that at the moment. And so if we're going to, and I agree, the council should pass this as a policy rather than a de facto policy. So I definitely agree with, I know that's been one of our big things a lot of us have pushed for. I know Al has pushed for that as well, and I agree. But if we're going to write it, though, I think it's got to be 100% accurate.
Yeah.
So what we do has to match what we say we do.
Under the, in the application, under documented proof of, they do list the
They do.
application forms from Medicaid or other state-funded medical assistance programs.
They do, and my only concern, without mentioning that we took it into account up
right.
front, it sounded like that was a way to qualify for, crudely put, forgive me, that I'm poor enough not to be able to pay my bill. But no, if you're that poor to be on Medicaid, you can pay your bill because we all pay it in our federal and state taxes. So they should pay it. That portion of the taxes, we should pay it rather than the local property tax owner eating it. And I think if you say that up there under the eligibility criteria, you won't give Medicaid a really clever way to not pay it, because they shouldn't if you tell them it's not owed. And I'm sorry, that's probably far more than you ever wanted to know about Medicaid, but I hate to see us leave that money on the table.
Well,
And I've learned this from experience in my day job.
our intent really is not to leave any money on the table, but is that
No,
an
I
amendment that you
understand,
can
that's
take
why I
on-
bring it up.
Can you make
'Cause-
that as an amendment
Yeah, just,
tonight?
yeah.
Yeah, I'll make that as an amendment, and I bring that up because that's a very specialized thing that I only would have known the last couple of years doing it. And I see where people do leave money on the table, so, and that's my day job to not, so I guess take the benefit of that if colleagues are agreeable.
And I just want to reiterate, some of this this is really to the work of Judy and Rick. Judy saw things on how we were getting some bad information. And when you're dealing
Yeah.
with medical information, it's not always easy to get
No.
the right information, especially if the person's not conscious. Or so Rick's made some steps to try to clean up that type of information. What was happening was we were holding people's
Income tax refunds? and
Yeah.
just see-
Oh, sure, sure.
we
And
didn't
I
have
don't mean
good
to criticize
information.
the process or writing it down. This is a very well crafted. It's just on that one piece that I know a fair amount of, if I may say, in my day job. I just saw where we unintentionally, I'm sure, left some money on the table if as written, because Medicaid isn't easy.
Sure.
We're good.
We can add that to that sentence?
All right,
or-
thanks.
You got a question now?
Okay, yeah, just a real small one, and by the way, I'm glad to hear that the process is working out such that it looks like hardship applications will be few and far between. This sort of information involved in the application for relief, other processes, does HIPAA or other privacy policies apply to these sorts of?
Another change I made with this is that rather than getting that information here in City Hall, it actually goes to our third-party biller who are fully HIPAA certified.
Okay.
And they have all that information, and if it would ever come to the point where somebody really qualifies for the hardship, then they'd reach out to us and say, so, approve or disapprove.
Got it.
So it's in a secured place, I feel much better.
Yep. That's because I saw the application and it just came to mind, so.
And that's
perfect.
why, you'll notice on it, it
Wait
says,
a minute.
reply and send it back to Intermedics, don't send it to us here.
Right. And that was when I saw
Very
the
good.
address, I thought, why is it
Thank
going
you.
there? Well,
You're
that's
welcome.
a great reason.
Oh, and that's another good point. On the application, you probably want to include a consent form for the person to sign that's not only HIPAA compliant, but again, if they're on Medicaid, there's some federal regulations that go even above and beyond HIPAA, and people, I don't think, realize that HIPAA is a floor in legal speak. That is, it's a minimum standard of, it's pretty stringent,
Right.
but it's a minimum standard, and different government programs can choose to go above and beyond it and be even more stringent, and Medicaid has. And so what I'd suggest, and I guess it's a plug for my day job, I created a form for my work that meets the HIPAA and the Medicaid privacy rules. And so you could probably, it's a public forum, you could go to Nebraska's Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, and it's the HHS-160. And you might look to that as for some inspiration. There's a lot of boilerplate, that is, there's a lot of small print, but having that sort of thing in there keeps you from somebody suing us successfully for violating their privacy. So you may want to throw some of that
But
in.
there's nothing in this that has to do with HIPAA. I mean, this
Well-
is basically asking them for information on their finances. HIPAA would be a protection against us leaking information or giving information involving somebody's health.
Oh, it's far worse than that. If someone's on Medicaid, even the fact that they're on Medicaid is protected health information, even from courts and law enforcement.
And that's another reason why we have intermedics doing all of that, and
this.
taking all of that information. We have none of it downstairs any longer.
They still need to, and that's something we could talk offline, they still need to consent though, because you're the vendor doing it on our behalf, the rules still apply and we would get tagged with the liability. And I'd be happy to geek out on that, but probably now is not the time, but, I just highly recommend that we do that, and I'd be glad to talk to you.
Is it a big deal if we postpone it then?
I don't think you need that on the application.
Yeah, we can just do it.
I don't think the application, unless you disagree, I think if the policy had the wording there, if the application form were tweaked, would we need to approve that sort of change?
If you gave general direction as to what you'd like to see included in the
Okay.
operation.
Then I
So you
think
could
we
just
could
make
do
the
it tonight. I don't want to delay it. I just
could make the
take the
amendment.
benefit of that if folks are willing.
And you can help out with that.
Yeah, I'd be very glad to draft that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Anything else in the resolutions?
Just, I asked some questions earlier, and this goes to the Walnut Grove subdivision project and the replacement of the sewer line. I reached out last week on this question, just asking about the condition of the sewer line, either to the east or the west of that project site. And I got back an explanation saying that there's nothing wrong with the sewer line per se. It's just that given the construction or given the material that the pipe was made out of, that it was surmised that it would be wise to replace that segment of sewer system with a more durable pipe. And I just wanted to see if that matched up with your understanding of the need for that line replacement. I guess to continue why I'm asking the question, I had a couple of constituents on opposite sides of that project who suggested that they had had prior problems with their sewer lines in that immediate vicinity. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. Could you repeat the question? There was a lot of question in there, I guess.
I do that.
We're replacing the sewer in the block as part of the Walnut Creek project because the school was built on top of it.
Yeah.
There was concerns about when they demoed the school, if it damaged it. The pipe underneath the school itself was a cast iron pipe. Most of the sewer in the west end is clay. Cast iron is very strong, but it corrodes easily. And the thought was if we're building new houses on top of basically with a 50-year-old sewer in their backyards, there's no alley.
Uh-huh.
The likelihood of us having to go in there and dig that up in the next 20 years is probably good.
Yeah.
And it just made sense to replace the sewer before the houses were built so that we don't have to drive through backyards to get there and make repairs.
So to your understanding then on, in the area immediately to the east or the west of that line, that there's been no issues, there's been no blockages or?
Bringing that up.
No more than any other sewer in the west end, no. I mean, all the sewer is 50-plus years old and.
Okay.
But the I'm not aware of any history of problems that, and then, to be honest, that's a whole separate issue if there is.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to ask because of the way that the staff package was written, it's kind of like, well, kind of left a question in my mind whether or not there was a problem there, and I think that you've kind of answered that satisfactorily, so I appreciate it.
I think every sewer in the West End could be replaced just from the fact of its age.
Yeah.
Period.
Okay. Well, I just saw the term inadequate, so I thought I would ask. Thank you.
Do you ever hear the jokes that some of them are still made out of hollowed out logs? Especially in the hills in the center of town. I keep hearing that, but I've yet to see one.
Any other questions on the resolutions?
Let's see.
No.
Applications for permits and cancellations?
That's an interesting situation.
Right, I know.
I like how it's written so nonchalantly, too. I'm not going to hold that against them, though, but you can't make that up, the bottoms-up one.
Yeah, the way that was,
It was nonchalant.
Yeah, they responded and encountered over 100 people in the parking lot.
not just 100 people.
Many of them patched members
Yeah.
of the Hells Angels. Officers were not able to locate the suspect. Well, imagine that.
Situation.
The fact that that didn't become a news, a much larger news story is a great credit, with all kidding aside, to our police. I can only imagine.
All right. We are executive session, or I'm sorry, bus bench discussion. And if you have something else to do, don't feel obligated. Except in your case.
It's a very